This investigation started on Christmas Eve of 2018. I received a call around 10 o'clock p.m. that night indicating that a man had been shot and that he had died in hospital. The victim himself had attended a Christmas party that evening with one of his acquaintances, and as he was leaving, was ambushed by the suspects.
I'm Erica Natividad in Richmond Hill, where a Toronto man has died after being gunned down on Christmas Eve. It happened here around 9:30 at night in this typically quiet residential neighborhood. Police tell me that they believe the shooting was targeted.
There's going to be a significant impact to the families and the neighbors that live in that area, who should have been spending quality time with their families on Christmas Day, but instead we're answering the door to investigators and looking outside and seeing crime scene tape, and our investigators going door to door and taking photographs and collecting video evidence. So I think that'll have a significant impact on the community.
As primary investigator, you have to kind of control the speed, direction, and flow of the investigation, assigning tasks to multiple people involving multiple units.
As we're doing our background investigation into our victim, Mr. Rafipour, we had learned through speaking with friends and family that he was loosely connected to some associates that were tied to the tow truck industry.
Our homicide was a smaller piece of what was going on in the GTA. We were learning that there was arsons, property damage, people getting shot, injured, threatened. So from there it snowballed by us communicating with whether it's Toronto and outside jurisdictions, finding out if there's any commonalities.
Mr. Rafipour was targeted due to his connection with the tow truck industry, and that formed part of the motive. First major breakthrough that we had was in around April of 2019, 5 months after the homicide had occurred, and it's when we recovered the vehicle that we believed was the suspect vehicle involved in the shooting. We had learned that it was parked abandoned in a parking lot days after the murder had occurred and had sat there for several months. This location was about 8 kilometers away from the scene, so obviously it was of interest to us.
From that vehicle, by running the plate, and that plate came back to a car rental company that was associated to a tow truck company. And doing an offline search, we found that that vehicle was at the Monte Carlo Inn, a hotel located in Vaughan, days before the homicide, which is important. From there, we were actually able to obtain video surveillance from the Monte Carlo Inn, which showed a couple of the persons of interest that had been in the hotel and checked in a few days prior to the homicide. In addition, one of those suspects that was seen on video at the Monte Carlo, his phone synced to the suspect vehicle on the day prior to the homicide, so that links him to the vehicle.
Later in the year of 2019, almost a year after the homicide had occurred, we discovered that a red Mazda was also involved in the planning and execution of the murder and the surveillance leading up to the homicide. We were able to show that the vehicles were believed to be traveling in tandem on the night of the murder, and we believed that they were ultimately responsible or involved in picking up the suspects after the shooting occurred, once the vehicle had been abandoned. Very early on in the investigation, we engaged the assistance of Detective Sergeant Gregg Bailey, who was the polygraphist at the time, and he was responsible for interviewing, and he spent countless hours evaluating evidence, reviewing the case, and carefully preparing an investigative interview plan.
So it's almost like a big jigsaw puzzle piece, and we were only getting little pieces at the time. But ultimately, when we put them all together, it was easier to see what was actually going on, who was involved.
After nearly a year and a half, on March 17th, 2020, we made our first arrest. A second arrest followed the next day, followed by a number of other subsequent arrests in the following months. It was a huge relief when the jury returned the verdict of first-degree murder for both accused. This was a 5-year process, and the guilty verdicts came almost days to the 5-year anniversary of the murder. So it was a relief for myself, and I know for the entire investigative team. I felt that justice had been served, not only for the victim, his family, but for everyone involved.
The investigative team in the Rafipour homicide investigation exemplified the York Regional Police value of professionalism. Evidence gathered during Rafipour assisted other homicide investigations across southern Ontario. I would be remiss if I did not give an honourable mention to the 2 assistant Crown attorneys who worked tirelessly over a 3-year period with our investigative team. Their commitment resulted in the convictions that held these individuals responsible for the disregard for human life. Thank you, Detective Debbie Gilmour, Detective Sergeant Steve Harper, Detective Sergeant Gregg Bailey, Kevin Stewart, and Leslie Pasquino.